Here is a question that sounds like the beginning of a fight. What happened when early humans met another tribe? The popular image is simple. Two groups appear on opposite sides of a river, stare at each other, raise weapons, and violence begins. It feels dramatic, easy to imagine, and easy to turn into a story about ancient life being nothing but fear and conflict. But that picture is too narrow. It may be partly true in some moments and badly wrong in others, because another group was not only a threat. Another group could also be information, opportunity, danger, marriage partners, trade, warning, competition, allies, disease risk, or the reason your own group had to move carefully. For early humans, meeting strangers was not like passing someone in a modern city. There were no police, borders, passports, translation apps, phones, or neutral meeting rooms. A stranger could mean new tools, new songs, new routes, new foods, and new mates. A stranger could also mean ambush, theft, revenge, or conflict over water, animals, shelter, or territory. That is what makes the question more interesting than did they fight. Of course, humans have fought. Violence is part of the record. But cooperation, exchange, and social connection are also part of the human story. If every meeting between groups ended in killing, ideas would not spread, genes would not mix, tools would not travel, and human culture would be much poorer. If every meeting was peaceful, then fear, defense, suspicion, and territorial behavior would make no sense. The real answer is somewhere between those extremes. So this video is not about pretending early humans were noble, peaceful wanderers. It is also not about reducing them to constant tribal war. The better question is, how did small human groups decide whether strangers were dangerous, useful, or worth trusting? In the ancient world, meeting another tribe was not just a social moment. It was a survival gamble. One encounter could bring food, knowledge, marriage, conflict, or death. And the first few seconds, the distance, the posture, the weapons, the faces, the children, the gifts, the silence, may have mattered more than words. The mistake is treating another tribe as if it automatically meant enemy. That is a modern shortcut, and it flattens the situation. In a small prehistoric world, strangers were dangerous partly because they were unknown. But unknown does not only mean hostile. Unknown can mean useful, risky, attractive, confusing, powerful, sick, desperate, generous, or afraid of you in the same moment you're afraid of them. So the better question is not, did early humans fight other tribes? Sometimes, probably yes. The better question is, how did early humans manage the tension between fear and connection when they met people outside their own group? That changes the whole frame. A meeting was not one fixed event. It was a negotiation before language even had to do much. Distance mattered. Body posture mattered. Who approached first mattered. Whether people carried weapons openly mattered. Whether children were visible mattered. Whether food or objects were offered mattered. Whether the groups had met before mattered. This is important because humans are not only territorial animals, they are also network-building animals. A small group that never connected with outsiders could become isolated. Isolation can be dangerous. It limits marriage options, reduces information, weakens trade possibilities, and makes it harder to recover after hunger, disease, conflict, or environmental change. Another group could know where water still flowed, where animals had moved, which plants were fruiting, or which valley had become unsafe. A stranger could be a threat, but a stranger could also carry a map inside their memory. At the same time, trust could not be given cheaply. There were no contracts, no cameras, no courts, and no larger state to punish betrayal. If an encounter went wrong, the cost could be immediate. That is why the ancient meeting was probably cautious, layered, and full of signals. Early humans had to solve a problem modern life still struggles with. How do you open the door enough to gain from strangers without opening it so wide that danger walks in? To understand a meeting between early human groups, you have to picture a world where people were scattered, mobile, and deeply dependent on the few humans they knew well. Your own group was not just company, it was food sharing, childcare, protection, memory, tool knowledge, emotional safety, and a living map of the land. Outside that circle, the world became uncertain. Another group might appear near a river, a fruiting tree, a carcass, a seasonal camp, a stone source, or a path both groups used because the landscape made it useful. They might not be completely unknown. Maybe someone had seen their footprints before. Maybe an older relative remembered them. Maybe objects or tool styles had moved between groups. In prehistory, strangers were not always total strangers, but they were still people whose intentions had to be read carefully. The environment shaped the encounter. If food was abundant, meeting outsiders could be easier. There was more space for patience, exchange, and curiosity. If water was scarce, animals had moved away, or children were hungry, the same meeting could feel dangerous. Two groups approaching the same resource were not just having a social moment. They were testing whether the land could support both groups without conflict. Size mattered too. A small group meeting a larger group would think differently than two balanced groups. The presence of children, elders, and injured people changed the signal. A group traveling with families might look less like a raiding party, but it could also be more vulnerable. Weapons mattered, but so did whether those weapons were raised, lowered, hidden, or held as ordinary tools. Before anyone trusted words, bodies were already speaking. So the ancient context was not constant war or easy friendship. It was a world where social boundaries were flexible but serious. Your group needed outsiders more than you might think, and feared them for good reasons. Meeting another tribe meant standing at the edge of two possibilities. The world could become larger, or it could become more dangerous. The evidence for meetings between early human groups is scattered, but it points in two directions at once. Humans could be dangerous to outsiders, and humans also needed outsiders. The first layer is archaeology. Materials sometimes traveled far from their original sources. Stone, obsidian, shells, pigments, ornaments, and tool styles could move across landscapes much larger than one small group's daily range. Some movement came from direct travel, but some likely came through exchange. Objects crossing distance suggest that people were not sealed inside tiny worlds. They met, copied, traded, visited, married, or at least passed things through connected groups. The second layer is genetics. Human ancestry is full of contact. Modern humans outside Africa carry traces of Neanderthal ancestry, and some populations carry Denisovan ancestry as well. That does not mean every meeting was peaceful, romantic, or simple. It only proves that contact was real enough to leave descendants. Genes are a quiet record of encounters that happened long before written history. Groups met, relationships formed, and boundaries were crossed. The third layer is violence. Skeletons with weapon injuries, trauma, and mass death sites show that conflict did happen in the prehistoric world. But violence is not the whole record. If conflict were the only outcome, long-distance exchange, shared technologies, cultural similarities, and genetic mixing would be harder to explain. The evidence shows risk, not constant war. Strangers could become enemies, but they could also become partners, relatives, or sources of knowledge. The fourth layer is ethnography. Recent hunter-gatherer societies cannot be treated as living fossils, but they show what small-scale human life can make possible. Visits between camps, marriage links, exchange, alliances, ritual gatherings, and also feuds or raids. The same people can be cautious and social. The same border can be crossed peacefully in one season and dangerously in another. So the evidence does not support one clean myth. Early humans were not automatically peaceful, and they were not automatically violent. Another group could bring tools, songs, mates, warnings, and roots. It could also bring competition, fear, revenge, and death. The ancient meeting was powerful because both possibilities stood in front of each other at the same time. The mechanism of an encounter was built around signals, risk, and reciprocity. Before people could safely exchange food, mates, stories, tools, or knowledge, they had to answer one urgent question: what does this other group intend? In a world without police, written treaties, or neutral borders, that question had to be answered with bodies first. Distance, speed, posture, eye contact, raised weapons, visible children, open hands, and the choice to stop or keep approaching all carried meaning. This is why first contact was probably slow. A group that rushed forward could look aggressive. A group that vanished too quickly could look suspicious. A group that stood at a distance showed that it had families, lowered weapons, or placed food or objects where others could see them was creating space for interpretation. Trust did not begin as a feeling, it began as reduced uncertainty. But fear was not the only mechanism. Curiosity had value too. Another group might know a water source, a safer route, a better stone deposit, a seasonal food patch, or news about danger nearby. They might carry ornaments, pigments, tool forms, songs, words, or marriage possibilities that made both groups stronger. Exchange was useful because no small group could know everything or survive every bad season alone. Outsiders expanded the map. The danger was that exchange also created vulnerability. Share too much and you could be exploited. Trust too quickly and you could be attacked. Refuse all contact and you could become isolated. So humans likely managed outsiders through gradual testing. Small gifts before large trust, distance before closeness, repeated meetings before marriage links, public gatherings before private dependence. The meeting was not only about courage, it was about calibration. That is the human mechanism. Strangers are both threat and resource. Early humans had to hold both truths at once. They survived by reading signals, controlling distance, sharing carefully, remembering past encounters, and turning repeated contact into avoidance, alliance, or kinship. Imagine two small groups seeing each other near a river crossing at the end of a dry season. Neither side planned the meeting. One group came for water and fish trapped in shallow pools. The other came from upstream, carrying bundles, children, and a few stone tools made from a material the first group has rarely seen. For a few seconds, nobody moves. The river makes noise between them, but the real sound is silence. The first decision is distance. People do not rush forward. They stop where they can still retreat. A few adults move slightly ahead, while children and older people stay behind. Spears or digging sticks are visible, but not raised. Faces are watched carefully. Are weapons pointed? Is this a hungry group, a frightened group, or a group that already knows this place and thinks the newcomers should leave? Then small signals begin. One person lowers a tool. Another steps back from the water. Someone speaks, even if the words are not understood, because tone matters before translation. A child appears from behind an adult, and that changes the feeling. A group with children may still be dangerous, but it is also showing vulnerability. After a long pause, someone places a small object on the ground near the open space. A shell, a piece of food, a useful stone flake. It is not friendship yet, it is a test. The other group has choices. They can ignore it, take it and run, answer with their own object, or move away. Every option says something. If they offer food back, the air changes. If they keep distance but do not threaten, the meeting may continue. If someone moves too fast, hands tighten around tools and the scene can collapse. Nothing dramatic has to happen for the encounter to matter. Maybe the groups only share a little food, copy a tool shape, point toward a route, or remember each other's faces. Maybe they separate before dark, still unsure. But the next time tracks appear near the river, they will not be completely unknown. The meeting has become memory, and memory is how strangers slowly become enemies, allies, relatives, or warnings. The twist is that meeting another tribe may have been one of the ways early humans became more human. The dangerous part is obvious. Strangers can threaten food, children, territory, and safety. But the powerful part is easier to miss. Strangers also break the limits of your own group. They carry other memories, other roots, other tool habits, other warnings, other ways to solve the same problems. A small group that only trusts itself may feel safer for a while, but over time that safety can become a trap. If food fails, if disease spreads, if partners are too closely related, if the group loses skilled adults, or if the landscape changes, isolation becomes dangerous. Contact with outsiders creates risk, but it also creates a larger human network. That network can move ideas farther than one person can walk in a day. It can move mates across groups, objects across valleys, and information across seasons. So the ancient encounter was not just a question of violence versus peace. It was a question of controlled openness. Too much suspicion and a group might cut itself off from tools, knowledge, marriage, and allies. Too much trust and it could be exploited or attacked. The skill was not simply being friendly or being aggressive. The skill was reading the moment. When to approach, when to wait, when to trade, when to leave, when to remember a face, and when to teach children that some strangers are not the same as others. That is the deeper twist. Human survival was not built only inside the camp. It was also built at the edge of the camp where fear met curiosity. The boundary between groups was dangerous, but it was also where culture could grow wider than blood. Today, meeting strangers can feel ordinary because modern life surrounds the encounter with systems. You can pass hundreds of unknown people in a station, a school, a store, or a street without treating each face as a survival question. There are laws, cameras, shared languages, money, roads, phones, and institutions that make strangers easier to ignore. You may not trust everyone, but you usually do not have to decide in a few seconds whether another group means trade, marriage, warning, theft, or attack. For early humans, that decision sat much closer to the body. A stranger was not just a person you had not met. A stranger was an unknown network. Behind them were other people, other memories, other claims to land, other tools, other diseases, other stories, and other possible futures. One meeting could widen the world or make it smaller. It could open a route, create a marriage link, spread a useful technique, or begin a feud that lasted longer than the original argument. That is why the old image of two tribes instantly fighting is too simple. Fear was real, violence was possible, but if humans had treated every outsider as an enemy, human culture would have stayed trapped in tiny pockets, tools would have moved more slowly, stories would have stopped at the edge of each camp, genes would have stayed more isolated. Knowledge about water, animals, plants, and danger would have died inside small groups instead of traveling across landscapes. The deeper answer is that early humans probably met outsiders with caution, signals, memory, and testing. They watched before they approached. They judged posture, weapons, children, gifts, distance, and past experience. They could avoid, threaten, exchange, visit, marry, imitate, or remember. The encounter was not automatically war or friendship. It was a negotiation between two ancient needs. Protect your group and do not cut your group off from the wider human world. So what happened when early humans met another tribe? Sometimes danger, sometimes opportunity, often something in between, and in that uncertain space, humans learned one of the hardest survival skills of all: how to turn strangers into enemies, allies, relatives, or stories worth passing on.